7 decades ago, the first television adaptation of Superman arrived. Now, it's time to rocket back to the 1952 to 1958 series Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves. In this Rewatch podcast, my guests and I break down each episode, from its black and white crime drama beginnings to the kid-friendly color seasons, as we celebrate one of the most underrated Man of Steel depictions of all time. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 1, Episode 9, Rescue, is one of the hosts of the STAR SUPERFAN Podcast, Rob O'Connor. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Delighted to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. A couple episodes ago, we had Tom from the Superboy Legacy page and podcast from England. We had Nathan McKenzie from Superman, the animated podcast in Australia. Now we have you from Ireland. We've really gone international here. I think this is very cool.
Around the World with Superman. It's literally the title of an episode of this show.
It is. It really is. Speaking of your podcast, STAR SUPERFAN, I just last night was listening to the two-parter that you and your co-host Alan did on Panic in the Sky, like the most famous Adventures of Superman episode, as well as its tellings in comics and elsewhere on television, including Lois and Clark and Superboy. I really enjoyed it. I hope that people of this podcast will check out your show generally, and maybe those two episodes in particular, if they're fans of the George Reeves show, that could be a great jumping on point for them.
Absolutely. It's one of our lower rated episodes. So thank you for listening. And it's one of the earlier ones we did. So it possibly doesn't always give the best kind of representation of the chemistry and the kind of the play-by-play we have now. But I'm very, very fond of that episode, especially the breakdown we do of Panic in the Sky, where my co-host Alan just loses his mind about the Daily Planet news team not being able to recognize Clark as Superman, even when he's not wearing his glasses, which never really bothered me watching the show, but it really bothered him. So it's worth it just for that kind of 5-minute rant alone.
Gotcha. Now, you spoke about this in those episodes, so I kind of already know the answer, but for our audience here, what is your history with Adventures of Superman?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I obviously I grew up with Lois and Clark and the Christopher Reeve movies and the animated series and that kind of thing. I didn't. I never saw the George Reeves series at all on television. I don't know, was it just that it wasn't airing at the time, or had it not aired in a while? I do know that it definitely aired on the BBC at some point in the 50s all the way through to the 80s, because lots of British creators cite it as being their first version of Superman. I know John Byrne definitely says it in one of the forwards of the Man of Steel trade paperbacks, but I certainly never saw it. I remember reading in a letters page once about Jack Larson showing up in the Seinfeld American Express ads as an 8-year-old, and I was like, who's Jack Larson? What are they talking about? So the first time I saw it was when the DVDs came out here in Ireland in the mid-2000s, around the time of Superman Returns, and I bought season 1, and I just loved it straight away. I very quickly fell in love with it, which doesn't always happen with kind of older shows that you go back to and stuff like that. I especially like season 1 and 2, the grittier feel of season 1, and then just sort of the all-American kind of Superman feel of season 2. And there's a lot of fun to be had in the color episodes as well. You're a while away from this episode, so I am going to say, if you make it as far as Flight to the North, I please consider having me back on for that one, because I just think it's an amazing episode.
All right, listen, I'll make a note on my master Excel spreadsheet. I've got them all listed there. Yes, it will be a while, but I'll put you down for that one.
You're familiar with Flight to the North, obviously. The lemon meringue pie episode.
Just generally, it's funny because I've only seen about a quarter of the color episode, so I'm far shakier on that. I've seen all of seasons 1 and 2, and of course now I'm making my way through them again for this podcast. But the color episodes I only really kind of like dabbled in before, and I'm a little nervous about getting to those seasons because, like yourself, I love these first two so much. And the show changes considerably. But even in the selection of color episodes that I watched, even though they're not my favorite episodes of the series, they're, like you said, there is fun to be had, and I know we'll get great discussions out of them. So I am looking forward to getting there.
Yeah, well, suffice to say that there is an episode where a gangster threatens the life of someone over a lemon meringue pie, and he has to go to Antarctica to get another pie just like it, and Superman chases after him. But meanwhile, there's another man whose name is also Superman, also going to Antarctica. It's just completely off the wall and crazy. And if David Lynch ever made a Superman movie, it would probably be based off Flight to the North. So I can't wait for you to get to that one.
All right, we'll keep an eye out for that one. Do you remember
Yeah.
what season that is?
Oh, it's. I feel like it's season 3 or 4. It's not too far into the color episodes, but
Okay,
it's very memorable. It's one of the rare color episodes that I would actually go back and rewatch. So that's how
gotcha.
memorable it is.
And look, though, it's interesting is when we get to those color years, they're going to go a lot faster because there are only 13 per season instead
That's
of
right.
these 26 episode seasons that we're working with now. So, yeah, well, that's something for for us to look forward to. Right now, we're here to discuss season 1, episode 9, again titled Rescue, written by Monroe Manning, directed by Tommy Carr. This aired on November 14th, 1952. Let me give my overview of this episode, and then we'll share our thoughts and we'll break it down. An inspector in Carbide, Pennsylvania shuts down a local mine for safety concerns, but the operator, Pop, ignores the warning. On his way down to the DC office of the Daily Planet, Clark drops Lois off in Carbide to report on the mining operation. While Lois is there, Pop is trapped in a cave-in. Despite a robust rescue effort from the townspeople and clear instructions not to interfere, Lois sneaks in to rescue Pop and finds herself trapped as well. Meanwhile, in a farcical series of near misses, Clark remains unaware of the danger to Lois until he finally arrives at the mine, after which Superman leaps into action. I gotta tell you, man, I'm coming in a little hot on this one. I had a lot of problems with this episode. And for anyone who loves or even likes this episode, awesome. I never ever want to take away from that. I take no delight in coming in and sharing problems that I had with it. But I struggled with this episode. But I'll toss it to you first. What were your overall impressions of this?
Well, I mean, it's very much a meat and potatoes episode. That there's nothing particularly memorable in it. I will say I liked that there was no kind of mobster of the week. It's very much the title of the episode is Rescue, and it's all about a super save as such. That there's no kind of villain. It's all about sort of Superman trying to find and help these people. I absolutely get where you're coming from. There's a lot of really bizarre contrivances and kind of dated moments and pacing issues, and forgetting that Superman has certain powers, which I always love. But I, I can't say that I didn't have fun. That there are far worse episodes in the color era. Put it that way.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. What can I say positive about this episode? I really was rooting for those rescue workers. I felt like out of everyone in the episode, Pop, Lois, Clark, and the rescue team really made a positive impression on me. That's who I was behind really for this episode. Mostly everyone else kind of frustrated me, but I liked the inspector and the other miners, and I did think just from a like a set design perspective, I liked what they were able to bring to life in that mine. When Lois and Pop are in there, and there's all the rubble and the dust, and then the gas that starts seeping in. You really felt like you were in that with them, and so I thought that was cool. That would definitely be a high point for me for this
I
episode.
I've actually written down nice mine production design because usually in shows from back then, Star Trek especially, there's a lot of spooky caves that just look like a backlot. That this does look like a mine, and when the cave in starts, it's fairly convincing. So I definitely agree that is one of the things they got right was they made it look like a mine, and they convinced me that it was caving in. So
Yes, like yourself, I do like just the big picture premise, like you said, of not having a mobster of the week, but really just more of a natural disaster sort of scenario. I do think the idea was cool. I just had a lot of problems with how this was realized, and I'm sure you've seen this one. I don't know how well you remember, although it is a very standout episode. But Night of Terror, a few episodes earlier, do you remember that one?
I can't say that I do. No, which one is that now?
That's totally fine. That's the one where Lois is at the motel and she and the innkeeper are held hostage by the mobsters. And a lot of the episode deals with getting the information of regarding her location to Clark. And we have Miss
Yes.
Bacharach, the inept secretary at the Daily Planet who, loses the message, and there's a lot of back and forth. It reminded me of that in the sense that Lois is in danger, and it's really just a matter of timing of getting the
Mm.
information to Clark. Once he has that information, the episode is going to be done. So it's like, what's happening to sort of delay that? And there, like here, it does get farcical, but I don't know. There was enough. I felt like that episode, and we covered that a couple weeks ago, did a better job of just building the tension. And I
Mm.
feel like engendering more sympathy toward Lois and the situation she was in. There was more going on. There was this whole bit about Jimmy being mistaken for this hitman, Babyface Stevens. Like there were a lot of great bits in there.
Oh, I do remember Babyface Stevens. Now that you say, does Jimmy do a mobster voice at some point?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, no, it's interesting that you pointed out, that the whole thing of Clark needing to realize that someone needs to be rescued. Definitely on one of the DVD sets for this series, that they brought back an actual writer from the show who must have been in the 70s or 80s by the time they filmed this, and he pointed out that that was kind of the linchpin of the formula was they could never really put Superman in danger because he can survive anything, so they always had to put Lois and or Jimmy in danger. And the challenge as a writer was finding ways for Superman not to find out straight away. Which I don't think I ever realized that watching the show until I heard this writer say it, and then you can't ever unsee it. And it's kind of a trope that survived into obviously later Superman shows, but then also other kind of, especially kind of 90s action procedural shows like Walker Texas Ranger and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, especially the kind of season 1. There's lots of episodes where Xander or Willow will get in a spot of bother, and she'll get she'll be in a taxi on the way or something, and the car will break down, and they always find ways to prevent the hero from getting to the scene of the crime, because once they get there, the shit that the episode is over, the story's kind of has unfolded. So it's interesting. I almost feel like maybe that trope started with this show. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Well, let's talk about the Clark of it all first, and then we can go back to Lois and the mine and all of that, because definitely have a lot to say on that front as well. But one thing that was interesting to me about this is I'm always fascinated with the show with respect to what we don't see, like what happens between the scenes and off screen. So there's the Washington D.C. office of the Daily Planet. It's like, what goes on there? I would love to spend some more time at the DC office. And Clark goes there and he's talking with one of the editors there and talking about how, I guess he went to interview someone and didn't get, what he was hoping to out of the interview. And
how'd you make out, Ken?
Exactly. And, the editor, invites him to go to the press club with him. And Clark's like, no, I have an errand to run. It's like, what's his errand? What business does he have in DC? Did he hear someone in trouble and he was going off as Superman? We don't really get that sense, but it's like, what's his errand? Again, I know it's just a little throwaway line, but it's just like the private life of Clark Kent. What is this guy up to? Because there are other episodes, and we haven't really gotten to them yet, but I remember from watching these first couple of seasons, instances where he knows someone, whether it's like a Navy admiral or scientist or whatever. But it's like, we've never seen the initial meeting. And you watch the origin episode, Superman on Earth. It's not like other iterations of the character where he has this long period traveling the world. He basically goes from Smallville to Metropolis. It's like, when and where and how is he meeting all these people? Like, I'm fascinated by that.
Have you gotten to the stolen costume yet?
No. So that's midway through season 1. So we're just a few episodes away. I'm very excited to do that one.
Okay, well, without giving too much away, it is definitely one of the best episodes. There is a character in that called Candy Myers, who is kind of a private eye, and him and Clark are said to be these, long-standing friends, and you never really see them meet or anything like that. They're just friends straight away, exactly like what you're saying, and it implies that there's this whole rich history that we haven't seen. And what I would advise you do when you go to watch that episode is go back and listen to the radio show, because that's where they introduce Candy Myers, and they introduce a lot of these kind of, friends of Clark Kent that he has and stuff like that. And I often feel like the George Reeves show was kind of writing the episodes as if it was a continuation of the radio show in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of kind of implied history there that you're supposed to know things that might have happened in the radio show. And then in some cases, like the stolen costume, it's just literally an adaptation of something they did on the radio show. So they just brought over the script wherein it was an established thing that he was friends with Candy. So I think it's a bit of that, you know. Superman was in the public consciousness for a long time, and especially on the radio show, you know, he was engendering all these relationships and stuff like that, and they just didn't have time to get to it on the show, so they just skipped ahead, you know. But no, absolutely, like that. There's this whole kind of lived-in world of Metropolis that we don't really see and we don't really get a full sense of. And yeah, no, it's really interesting. I love that about the show.
That's a great tip, though. I appreciate that. It's interesting. So on my other show, Digging for Kryptonite, a big part of that show is my closing gaps in my Superman fandom, right? Because as much as I've been reading and watching this stuff for most of my life, there still was a lot that I had not really experienced, and now I've closed many of those gaps. The radio show still remains a pretty open one. Like I did listen to Clan of the Fiery Cross. We did an
Yeah.
episode on that. And of course, that's an iconic story, and I'm glad that I was able to experience that. But there are thousands of radio show episodes, so there's a lot to mine. But I appreciate that tip. I will definitely do that during my prep for the stolen costume, and I'll be curious to see how that then colors the way I see that dynamic between Clark and Candy in the show.
Yeah, it's the same way kind of the Christopher Reeve movies have had this huge impact on all the kind of other media versions of Superman we've had since. I think the radio show was very much like that. You know, the Kirk Allen serials, and then to some extent this show, were far more. They were taking their lead from that more so, I think, than the comics at that point in time. So it's interesting that there's always kind of that problem with Superman where they kind of take the lead from the other media versions rather than strictly the comics themselves. That's why, especially on our show, we don't even really consider Superman to be a comic character the way Spider-Man is. You know, he has such, like, Jimmy Olsen comes from the radio show, Kryptonite comes from the radio show, Perry White comes from the newspaper strip. Like, there's all these different things feeding into the mythos, so it's not just this one thing, you know.
That's an excellent point. I agree wholeheartedly. And this was actually something that I think just came up in our last episode when we did the Mind Machine, because this is something that I reflect on, especially when I did sort of my golden age deep dive on the other show a little while back, where Superman had permeated all these different forms of media so early. It is not like Spider-Man, where you have so many years where it's primarily the comics and then it explodes
Yeah.
onto the movies and everything like that. With Superman, you had so much with the theatrical, the animation and the movie serials, and then this show and the radio and the newspaper strips. Like, there was so much and so early. So I think you're right. I think that is a valid way to look at the character for sure. So speaking of Clark, again, we mentioned him being at the DC office of the Daily Planet.
We're doing anything to avoid talking about this episode.
And there are, I would say, I guess, three main instances where he almost gets the information he needs. As he's leaving the office, we have the message coming through the telegraph, I suppose, right, about the cave-in and reporter Lois Lane being trapped. But he's already left. He's just walked out as this is coming in. And then I don't know how much longer this is supposed to be, how much later it's supposed to be. You don't get the sense that much time has passed, but he's outside the building getting into his car like a scene or two later. And right as he gets in and drives off, we get the stack of newspapers delivered. And the big headline is all about the cave-in. So that's miss number 2.
Small bit of trivia. Did you notice the newspaper prop that he picks up?
No, I don't think I did.
So the newspaper prop he picks up says rope burglar strikes again, which is used in the stolen costume and actually sets up the guy who steals Superman's costume at the start of the episode. He's climbing a rope, and you see that that prop kind of fill the screen. It says rope burglar strikes again. So I'm guessing that stolen costume may have been filmed prior to this, and they still had the prop.
Oh, nice catch. Oh, that's great. No, thank you for pointing that out. That's a great catch. I like that. Nice to have. That's the thing. You don't get a lot of tie-ins in these episodes, so even something as small as that is pretty cool.
You see that a lot in Lois and Clark. That there was this one newspaper prop they had in season 1 about fruit fly spraying, and it pops up in every season of that show. And you're just like, did they just have loads of this one prop lying around? It's funny. I always like when that happens.
Yes, no, very much so. The third, and I think most egregious instance of the near miss, is as Clark is driving back to Carbide and has some car trouble and gets out and pops the hood. And while he's working on the car, the radio is playing, right? And it mentions this cave in, and right as the radio report mentions Lois, he's revving the engine, right? And he misses the part about Lois. Now, let's put the super hearing aside for a second here. I had a more fundamental problem, and correct. Maybe I'm misremembering this. Maybe I got the timing wrong. So correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm almost positive that it unfolded the way I just described, where he's not revving the engine during the part about the cave in generally. It's only during the
Yes.
part with Lois. Why does he not care about the cave in? It's only, it's only, and even, I want to skip ahead for a second, but when he shows up at the mine and he sees all of this commotion, this guy walks up as cavalier as can be. It's like, buddy, take a look around. Clearly this is a dire situation. And it's only when they mention Lois that he's like, what? So
Yeah.
did you have an issue with this or not? I don't know.
I did have an issue with that. My only assumption, because I've watched the episode twice now, and on the second viewing, I kind of thought, well, do they say that there are people trapped in the mine, or do they just say that there's been a cave in? That was the only thing in his defense. But to your point, it's one of those real bugbears I have in different iterations of Superman, where he has this real Lois bias, where he's always saving Lois, but Superman's supposed to always save everybody. Like, I think there's a line in World's Finest, the otherwise excellent animated crossover where he meets Batman, and there's a bit at the start where the terrorists are on Air Force One, and Lois says, "Oh, I'm Lois Lane," and he goes, "You mean the one Superman always saves?" And then Superman shows up, and you're like, "Well, surely Superman would have showed up anyway." I don't know, but yeah, no, I definitely did think that. But I think the super hearing is the bigger issue here.
I don't know. Is there any way we could account for this? I mean, I guess you could say I don't know. He wasn't, he wasn't dialed in, right? We know he can
Yeah.
tune out, he can focus. So I guess he was just really focused on that car at the moment. I don't know. That was a tough one to get past. I really had an issue with that, but it is what it is. There's one more piece with Clark that, again, this feeds into my larger frustration with this episode, where I just feel like there are certain things that could have been remedied rather easily. And I just find some of the creative choices like kind of baffling. And this last thing that I'm going to mention is a great example of it, where once Clark realizes that Lois is in the mine, he runs off behind a boulder, right?
I've written this down.
And everyone's watching him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, seconds later, Superman flies in. And I'm just saying to myself, look, there's a suspension of disbelief. We all have to buy in. And we do, as Superman fans, we do. But I feel like there's an unspoken agreement here. It's like, don't go out of your way to make it so unbelievable. And it's just like, why? I told you I was coming in hot on this. Why have everyone watching him?
Yeah,
right?
it's a weird edit. There was no need to cut to them looking in that direction. It's so strange. And then when Superman shows up, they all say, "Superman, where did he come from?" And you're like, you literally just saw where he came from. He came from the same direction where Clark Kent ran off to. It's bizarre, and it could have so easily been saved by just doing a shot where they were clearly looking at the mine instead, and then using it was totally just a disastrous edit there.
But to your point, that's the thing. And that's what got me, was that it wouldn't have taken much, right? Exactly what you described. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe another rock falls and they all turn to look at the cave just as this is happening. And then Clark runs off. Or maybe Clark says, "Oh, I got to go run back into town." Like, and he gets in the car. Anything. It was just so odd. I mean, it was really comical, the idea that they're all watching him and not realizing.
Especially because later in the episode, Superman does a great job of sneaking away unnoticed.
Yes.
So it's like, and that's the lesser of the two. Like, if no matter what direction Superman flies in, Clark walking back onto the scene isn't going to look suspicious. But the other way around,
right?
It's very, very strange.
That's a great point, though. And that was something that I did like in that final scene where Superman does, everyone's focused on Lois and Pop, and you see him start to slide back, and like, that was great. That's what we needed in this earlier scene. So again, the Clark of it all really, really frustrated me. But that's nothing compared to Lois. All right, so
the greatest rescue worker in the history of mining. The best rescue worker of the 20th century. Because did we have rescues as epic as we've had in the 21st century? I don't know. I'm not an expert on cave-ins, but she's very, very effective in her rescue work.
Yeah. Let me ask you the big picture question that I have, and then we'll get more specific about
Mm.
Lois's choices in this. But specifically with both Lois and Pop, right? I I really felt like this episode did not cultivate any real sympathy on the audience's part toward them. Did you feel? I mean, of course, look, Lois is one of our central characters. Of course, you want her to be okay, but did I really feel like the episode? You really had to work hard. I feel like to feel some
Mm.
sympathy for either of these characters. How did you feel watching this?
Yeah, I agree because she just runs in with total disregard to the authority and the wisdom of these. Why doesn't she just listen to them and let them do their job? I don't know. And again, an easy fix. That they lean on this trope a lot in, I think, this show and definitely in later Superman shows. Why not make Pop her uncle? Uncle Pop. The easy, So then there's an emotional attachment. She's not thinking clearly. She runs in. That's an easy way out. In terms of Pop, yeah, absolutely no sympathy. And God bless this actor. He sounds like he might have had a couple of brandies before he showed up on set, and that doesn't really help either. He's kind of his some of his words are a bit slurred, and he's kind of gargling when he speaks nearly. So it doesn't help matters when he sounds a little bit drunk and then he's talking about how safe the mine is. You're just like, no, sorry. I was wondering at the end of the episode, is this guy going to jail? Because he put a lot of people's lives in danger, including his own. So yeah, no, sympathy wise, I don't know. I mean, he was kind of an adorable old man. Like, you didn't want to see any harm come to him, even if he was really stupid and irresponsible. But no, yeah, definitely. And Lois, yeah, I don't know. Like, why did she care so much about this man's safety that she was like it? Even if there'd been a line where she kind of said, "Oh well, I got to get the story," one-on-one interview with this man who's about to die in a mine. Perfect. Front page news. That there wasn't even that. It was just her with a hero complex for this man she never met. It was odd.
I co-sign on all of that. So with respect to Pop, yeah, I mean he's told by the inspector right at the top of the episode, this mine isn't safe. The inspector shuts it down, puts the sign up. Pop instantly tears it down, tries to rope in another poor miner to go in, and the guy's
Ooh.
like, "I got a family, I can't be involved in this." And so Pop goes in by himself and gets stuck. And look, you don't want to. It's not like, oh, he deserves it, and you don't want to see him die. But at
Mm.
the same time, you disregarded safety instructions and you put yourself in this position, so it's kind of hard. And I guess with both characters, again, just kind of odd creative choices to me because I feel like there are various
Mm.
things they could have done to make this more believable, more reasonable, to engender more sympathy. With Pop, even if we had gotten any kind of a line about he's in dire financial straits, this is the only
Yeah.
thing, like he has to, something like that. And you could fill in the blanks on your own, but I don't feel we should have to necessarily. With Lois, so you brought up a great point about how it would have made more sense if she were chasing the story. And that's the thing, because I feel like this kind of cuts both ways. I feel like someone could sit here and say, hey, we really liked that it wasn't about a story for her. She just
Mm.
wanted to save this guy. But to your point, you have all of these rescue workers, and there's nothing, they talk about they need to wait, 24 hours, however long it is. They can't just rush in because it's the risk of the further cave in, and they have their whole procedure that they have to follow. And then later they try to go in
Mm.
another way. It's a whole thing. But there's nothing to indicate that their recommendations, that their course of action is unreasonable. And that's where
Mm.
I feel like this really breaks down. And like you said, there are ways around this. You could have made it that, again, Lois had a personal connection to Pop. You could make it this
Mhm.
was her hometown. I know there's another
Yeah.
episode coming up where, she does, we go to her hometown, I believe. But, they could have done something like that. They could have made it that, I don't know, she spent summers with family members who mined, and she had like some kind of background, and there was some basis for her refusing to follow the directions, but you didn't get
Mm.
any of that, and it's just so reckless, and it's just like, what? Who gives you the right? Like, what? Why? What makes you think you know better? I don't know. It was frustrating.
But what was more frustrating for me was that according to the episode and the events that unfold, she actually does know better because she finds him successfully.
I,
You know, she succeeds where, you know, what looked like over 30 rescue workers failed, in that she's able to like slither her way in and find him. And the only reason that things go horribly wrong is because she tries to use one of the, clearly the beam that's supporting the whole entryway. She tries to use that to pry up the rock that's, you know, keeping him pinned to the ground. If she hadn't done that, she probably would have been able to kind of get this guy to safety, or at least bring the other workers in, whatever route she took. That was my. I've, you know, again, I've seen the episode twice. The second time, it just suddenly hit me out of nowhere. There's like 30 rescue workers here, and Lois Lane, you know, this girl reporter from Metropolis, is able to just succeed and make her way in, and they're just all outside eating sandwiches. I made a note, by the way. There's this craft services table outside the. Did you notice this?
No.
There's a scene where I think Lois is talking to the foreman or whatever it is, and behind both of the actors there is a woman with kind of flasks of coffee, and she's giving out sandwiches to all the workers. And there's all these guys just sitting around having a little snack, like like it's a regular day at the office. And you're like, a man is about to die, and they're just there munching away like it's casual Friday. I thought that was very funny.
Well, maybe I should then retract what I said earlier about the rescue workers really being
Yeah.
the only heroes to root for in this. Although, look, maybe they had the same thought process that we just did about Pop. It's like, this guy got himself into this mess.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, that's the thing with Lois, where she proves herself to be surprisingly capable in getting in and locating Pop. But then, like you said, it's like, in what world do you look at what's clearly a support beam and be like, oh,
Yeah.
I'll use this? I don't know. Like I said, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I just feel like a lot of these things could have been avoided. I'm kind of curious how we landed where we did, because with a few, not even a radical overhaul of the episode, but I think just a few tweaks with respect to these things that we've mentioned would have made it a lot more believable. So I don't know. And as far as the rescue itself, of course, we get, Superman in the mine, and he holds it up while, Lois and Pop are able to get out of there. Uh, what did you think of Lois's final line after Clark shows up?
I'll foreshadow this by saying Phyllis Coates is my favorite Lois of the two. I by quite a considerable margin, by the way. I think she's quite a bit better than Noelle Neal. And no disrespect to Noelle Neal, like, she was an amazing ambassador for the role. She was great to the fans. She went to thousands of conventions over the years, amazing stuff. But like, they definitely leaned in a very different direction with Lois after season one, and I think it was a huge mistake and a shame, because Phyllis Coates was so great, and she really paved the path for Margot Kidder and Terry Hatcher. But yeah, strange final line. She says, "Hey Clark, Superman finally took me out." And the second time I watched this, I was watching it with my fiance Saoirse, who has suffered through too many hours of Superman shows over the years, and I could just hear her voice go, "Oh," just with disgust at the kind of chauvinism. And there's already a bit of kind of misogyny in this episode anyway. Like, when Clark drops her off at the foreman's office, and both Clark and the foreman are kind of talking about Lois like she's a child. It's like, okay, Lois, you go off and enjoy yourself and get your little story. And then the foreman turns to her and goes, "So, Miss Lane, what kind of story do you want?" And you can see the revulsion on Phyllis Coates' face. So to have her have to deliver a line like that at the end, yeah, it was a definite groaner. And one of the weird things about season one, specifically season one of the show, is, usually when you have a final line like that, they play a jaunty little bit of music at the end to kind of cap off the episode. For whatever reason, in season one, they always just end with complete silence. And it just makes it even more kind of like, ugh. Like, at least if there was an old kind of silly little bit of music, you might be able to kind of laugh along with it. Oh, it's the 50s, it's so long ago. Let's not judge it too harshly. But in the presence of just that cold, eerie silence, you're just like, I don't like this.
I'm with you. And we're 9 episodes in. I have to go back and check the tape, but I believe that every guest who has come on, and myself as well as host, have expressed a preference for Phyllis Coates. What's funny is every time someone says it, it's always with everyone always pays respect to Noel Neill, and everyone's always not afraid to voice it, but it's always like
Mm,
because Noel Neill has such a revered space in the show and the mythology. I think everyone is always delicate in the way they voice his opinion, but you're not alone. I mean, again, I
yeah.
think this is a common theme, and especially now as I'm rewatching this, I do vastly prefer the toughness that she brought to it, and but that's what made that last line even feel even more out
Yeah.
of place, given this incarnation of Lois. And this is not. I don't know. I don't feel like we've gotten much in these episodes that would really kind of justify
Yeah.
her expressing that at the end. So it felt in a season two, or certainly the color season episodes, I think this would have felt perfectly of a piece. But here it felt very out of place.
It's absolutely a Noel Neill season 3 or 4 kind of line, and Jimmy would be beside her, kind of guffawing as she said it.
Yeah. Speaking of Jimmy,
And,
there's no Jimmy, no Perry, no Inspector Henderson. This is strictly a
no,
Lois and Clark episode.
yeah, but very, very odd. I feel like that was kind of a thing in season 1. The haunted lighthouse, is that another one where it's literally just Superman and Jimmy, and there's no
Hmm.
is Clark even in that episode? I'm trying to remember.
Yes, Clark is in that episode
Okay,
because Jim calls Clark and says that he needs help, and then Clark shows up on Moose Island 10 minutes later. He's like, how'd you get here so fast? And then later, of course, changes into Superman. So yeah, we do get, but it's not until about halfway through the episode that you even see Clark
true. Yeah, yeah.
in that
I, I
light.
I have to add, by the way, just totally out of context, it would be remiss of me to come on a George Reeves rewatch show and not do my impression of Jack Larson in Panic of the Sky when he arrives into Clark Kent's apartment and says, "Mr. Kent, I've got the coffee and sandwiches." Because I'm just obsessed with the way Jack Larson says sandwiches. It's so strange.
Dude,
I
me
love.
too. No, me
God bless
too.
that man.
Yeah, there's always something, and that episode in particular, when he talks about going to get the coffee and sandwiches, and then when he comes back with the coffee and sandwiches, and even too, and I know I'm really nitpicking here, but it was just like it's been a little while since I watched it, but the bag that he brings
Mm.
back, it's like cups of coffee in a bag. I mean,
In a
this they
bag,
have
yeah.
a lid you can, but I've never transported coffee that way. I wouldn't, again, I know it's just a prop, but it always makes me laugh.
Actually, if you get coffee delivered to you, they give it to you in a bag, which it's kind of reminiscent of that. But yeah, it is very, very strange. It's like the sandwiches and the coffee are in the same bag, and he lifts it out almost like it's a bucket of coffee, or like soup rather than coffee. It's
Right.
just, it's a century ago. You got to give it to him. But yeah, I love that moment.
Yeah, it is great. So yeah, we don't have most of our cast for this episode. Of course, we have our two central characters, but yeah, not a ton of interaction. Right? They're really for most of it, kind of off on their own. We haven't even hit the 40-minute mark. I don't really know that I have much more to say about this episode. We still have to give our overall rating of the episode. We'll get to that. But is there anything we didn't talk about in this rescue episode that you wanted to discuss? Oh, hang on a second. It looks like your audio cut out there. I thought you were just taking a dramatic pause. Let's see. No, I still cannot hear you. Okay. Let us hit pause here. And we're back. So, as I was as I was starting to ask you, is there anything else that we didn't talk about with respect to this episode that you wanted to?
One other thing, just when Lois is in the kind of enclosed part of the cave with Pops, and she goes to get the support beam, uh, she she realizes that the thing is about to cave in a full second and a half before it actually does, and she ducks down. And you can't blame Phyllis Coates for this. Obviously, something went wrong with whatever special effect they were using to cause the cave in. But by God, man, just do another take. Were they under such time and money pressure that they couldn't just go back and do that again? Like she ducks down a beat passes, and then the dust starts falling and the thing starts. It really stood out to me. I was like, and again, it's an editing thing. It's just cut to a shot of Pops just going, and then you just cut back to her ducking in the whole cave. It's peculiar. I feel like so much of what we talked about here tonight has less to do with the script, and there's definitely a lot of problems with the script, but I feel like it's direction and editing are the main kind of flaws here. And if you tweaked little parts of those, then maybe this would have made a lot more sense. Or at least wouldn't have been quite as ridiculous. But in general, I try not to be. And if you listen to our show, I can be very, very harsh about Superman shows, especially the newer ones, like even Smallville. I find anytime we go back to that, I get really nitpicky and really irritated by certain things. But this show is just so old, and it's literally one of the first television programs. So, with these kind of lapses in logic and everything else, and the news team not recognizing Clark with his glasses off and things like that, I kind of just approach it as part of the texture of the whole thing. And it nearly wouldn't be as special if it wasn't a little bit silly at times, you know?
That's more than fair. And look, like I said at the top, I don't want to take away from anyone's enjoyment. If this
Mm.
is a favorite episode of anyone who's listening or watching to us, that's awesome. If anything though,
I really don't think it's anyone's favorite episode. I mean,
probably not, but yeah, you never know. But here's the thing, and to sort of spin this into a positive, I think my frustration with this stems from how much I have enjoyed the other season
everything
one
so far.
episodes, right? The ones that we've
Yeah.
already covered and the ones that I know are still to come. It more stems from that. But
Mm.
your points are all well taken. It's like, yes, we do have to recognize the time period, the limitations in terms of budget and technology that they face. But again, I guess like we've been saying, that wasn't even where I felt there was a breakdown in this episode. Like it really
Yeah.
was just in the things that we've mentioned. So again, though, the frustration really comes from knowing how good it can be and how good,
Yes.
really, for the most part, the episodes that we've been talking about have been. That's where I just feel like I want it to live up to that. But it is what it is. It's funny though when you were talking about how a little editing could have fixed the scene with Lois and that further cave in. I think about that a lot in terms of the stock footage in other episodes of Clark in the Daily Planet building, running into the storage closet, right, to change.
And he will run out of a scene without his hat, and then they'll cut to the stock footage and his hat will be on, and then he'll take off his hat again. I love it.
And I always said to myself, and again, look, we know the production, we know that they did not have a lot of time and money. We know how they were filming these episodes in batches and filming, all of the Perry White scenes together and so on.
Mm.
But at the same time, I mean, how much time would it have taken to do two versions of that run into the storage closet, one with a hat
Yeah.
and one without? So that way you have a couple of options. So to your point, like I share that question as well. It's like, if they feel like relatively easy fixes. Again, though, I know it's easy for us to say this now, but I don't know. Something like that still sticks out to me.
And on a similar note, how much time would it have taken to have George Reeves lie down on the thing in the other direction so that they could film him, so that then they didn't have to flop the shot so that the S is the wrong way around when they need him flying in the other direction? I always find that so funny.
Yes, I think that's valid. So
Again, though, people were watching it on TVs that were the size of pencils, and you'd never notice that the S was the wrong. You might never notice that he has an S on his chest at all. It's just like this blob, amorphous blob of kind of, I was going to say color, but it wasn't even color. At one stage it was just brown, black, whatever. So
no, that's fair. I mean, and that's come up in the context of scenes where it's clearly his stuntman, right? And we've talked
mm,
about how, again, in terms of the kinds of devices people were watching these on back in the day, it's like it certainly wasn't as noticeable. But now, you're watching it in higher quality on these big TVs, and you're pausing it and you're rewinding it,
yeah.
and it becomes so much more apparent. But that wasn't a concern then. So
I I was thinking about this actually in preparation for this. For me, I feel like the George Reeves show, so often we forget that Superman on television, and not animation, specifically live action television, is such a huge, important part of his legacy as a character. But in so many cases, it's treated as this kind of consolation prize that, there's a Superman TV show. Well, I wish there was more Superman movies, but we have this TV show. Yeah, but the special effects aren't as good, and the stories and the acting or whatever it is, they're always kind of treated as less than. I feel like the George Reeves show is the only example where it was absolutely a step up from the previous version, which was a theatrical version, which was the Kirk Allen serials. And for me, I rewatched those recently, and I was there going, you know what? I'm glad these exist, even for the time these were made. I don't think they're very good. And I watch a lot of old time serials, so I would like to think I have some kind of valid opinion there. Like the Shazam one is excellent. I don't know. Have you ever seen the Captain Marvel serial?
I haven't seen those.
I highly recommend going back and watching that. The flying in that is genuinely great, and the guy playing Billy Batson is amazing, and the guy playing Captain Marvel, and it's loads of fun. And then when you go to watch the Kirk Allen one, you're like, oof, this is just a little bit stiff and a bit wooden. And I can see why they leaned away from all the fantasy type stories in the George Reeves show, because it's just very silly here. And it switches to an animated Superman when he's flying, and it just doesn't work. Whereas this show, every decision they made it more grounded. The flying looks very good for the time. George Reeves is a huge step up, I think, from Kirk Allen. Jack Larson from Tommy Bond. We kind of said it already. Phyllis Coates was a big step up from Noel Neal. So I think it's one of those rare cases where it's definitely better in every way than the theatrical version. And I think so. So even when there's kind of a weaker episode, compare that to Superman versus the Spider Lady. It's like, I don't know. I'll take this episode over that any day.
I agree with that. I had a similar experience, but probably around the same time as you, of watching the Kirk Allen serials, really not too long ago. And yeah, I respect what they did, and that this was the first live action incarnation of the character. So credit where credit's due. But yeah, they were tough to get through. Now, in fairness, and I talked about this, we did an episode on Digging for Kryptonite about it, where I binged it, and these were not meant to
Yep.
be binged at all.
No.
It gets very repetitive, but I was like in a time warp watching these things. And it got very tough to get through. And on the note of Kirk Allen, yeah, I agree. It really gave me, watching those serials gave me even more love for George Reeves and Adventures of Superman, because I'm essentially wearing the same costume, but the
Yeah.
presence, the presence and the charm and that magic that George Reeves has is like, you believe him as the character in a way that I there are things I really do like about Kirk Allen's performance, but I could never get past the fact that when he's in that costume, it just looks like a guy running around in a Superman costume. And when George Reeves
Yeah.
shows up in the costume, it's like, oh, it's Superman. So it really made me appreciate Reeves even more.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have pointed out, Christopher Reeve, you will believe a man can fly. Whereas with George Reeves, I believe that he could, run through a brick wall. And, he just has that stature and that sort of charisma about him that you believe he is incredibly powerful, even though there really aren't a lot or any special effects in the show. He's kind of just running into things and punching things. And he just has this kind of presence of power about him. And the way he runs just has this sort of godliness about it. And even just the kind of sheer energy in his voice. He just has that booming kind of thunderous voice. And he has all that authority about him. Like, he really, really was the right man for the job. And, for all the kind of problems he may have had outside the series, and, you can suggest maybe that was kind of apparent in his appearance as the show went on, but it definitely wasn't apparent in his performance, because he always gave it 100%. And, he is, and he's such a different kind of flavor of Superman. I think, a lot of people will say, if you don't like this version or you don't like that version, it's just because you grew up with the Christopher Reeve movies, and that's the version you like, and you think everything should be like that. And I'm like, well, George Reeves is so different to Christopher Reeve, and I love him too. So, that kind of way, it's such a different flavor. It's very much, and sorry if I'm rambling here. It's just this is such a more interesting conversation than talking about this episode. But I always think that even though this came out in the height of the Silver Age, it's very much a golden age Superman show. I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh, I agree completely, especially the first two, and in particular this first season. And I know you guys talked about it on your show too, but this Superman engages in fisticuffs with
Yeah.
the bad guys, and putting aside the physics of all of
Yeah,
this,
yeah, yeah.
it's such a different way of seeing the character move and act and interact and mix it up with, we see him fighting
Mm.
superpowered adversaries, but not the crooks and gangsters of the week. And it has this visceral, powerful action to it. It's really cool.
I do. As the series drags on, though, I'm always kind of like, would it have been so hard just to say that, Mobster of the Week has a serum and he has superpowers too? And, like, they seem so utterly resistant to do any kind of science fiction at all. And sometimes I'm kind of like, even the Adam West Batman had UFOs in one episode. It's like, it wouldn't have been that hard to, maybe there's a robot that Superman can throw down with or something like that. That's my only thing, is that they always seem to come back to gangsters every single episode. And I don't know, was that part of a, was it something to do with things being suitable for children? They didn't want children to be distrustful of mad or scientists, or that organized crime was the controversy of the day, and that's what kids should be afraid of, and that's all we're doing here. That's my only larger kind of criticism of the show, is that they never really pushed the boat out beyond kind of mobsters and confidence men and people trying to steal lemon meringue pies. But again, 70 years ago, they did a pretty good job as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, look, we're still talking about it, and a lot of it still does hold up in a lot of ways. And
100%.
It's funny, they're like, that they always go back to gangsters. Well, like, this was one episode where they didn't.
Yeah,
they would have been better off. Yeah, no, that's not where this episode fell apart. But so what we haven't done yet is give our rating. So I use a Fedora rating system here.
Oof,
so
I like it.
Out of 5 Fedoras, with 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, and halves are okay. We also had our guest last time, Craig Byrne from Krypton Site. He rather than giving a half, he did a hat and a tie. He started bringing in other articles of clothing. So there's some room to maneuver here. But generally speaking, on a scale of 1 to 5 Fedoras, how many would you give this one?
I will give this 2 fedoras and a redundant pair of glasses, but purely because Phyllis Coates just instantly elevates every episode she's in. And, anytime she was on screen, even I mentioned that scene at the start where Clark and the foreman are just talking about her like she's 7 years old. And you can just see her like glancing at both of them going, oh, these guys. Whereas if that was Noelle Neal, she'd probably just be smiling along with it, So she elevates, she brings something extra to every episode she's in. So I'll give her the redundant pair of glasses just for that.
All right, very nice. I won't be quite as generous. This might be a little harsh, but I'm going to go 1.5. I'll go 1.5. I really, I'll be honest, I really did not enjoy the viewing of this. Certainly not the way that I have of the other one. So my honest ranking would be 1.5 fedoras. So. I don't think there will be many others in this first season that get that. We'll see. I remember most of them like fairly well, so I think others will be higher, and certainly the past ones have been. So I'll go 1.5 for this. Here's the thing, and this is not exclusive to this podcast, but even other shows. Even if I don't enjoy even if I totally enjoy what I read or watched for whatever we're going to talk about, I always enjoy the discussion, and that sort of makes the whole thing even more worthwhile. So. I thank you for taking the time to watch and take notes and come on and discuss. And, we were talking off mic as much as we've, interacted on social media. This is the first time you and I have actually spoken. So I'm glad that we were able to connect. And for people who want to check out the STAR Superfan podcast, where would you like to direct them?
Yeah, so you can find us pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. George Reeves has definitely featured in our show before. Kind of the various television iterations of Superman have been a big part of what we've looked at. But we've also interviewed some of the great comic creators. We interviewed Mark Waid, James Mateus, Dan Riba from Superman the Animated Series, who spoke really, really highly of this show in particular. This was his introduction to Superman. Quite a number of other creators. We have an interview with the first ever Irish Superman artist who depicted John Kent saving Dublin, which is where I'm from, for the first time ever in a comic book. Superman comes to Dublin and does a super save in Dublin. So we have an interview with Cian Tormey coming up very soon. Very excited about that. And we're on all the social medias as well: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So definitely check us out there.
Very cool. Well, I hope that everyone will do that. Thank you again, Rob. Thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure that you come back in 2 weeks for our next all-new episode. Adventures await. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all